If you enjoy what we do on these podcasts, please go to mwpnews.com. There you can see articles about some of the movies we've seen, some things that we don't talk about on podcasts, and links to ways you can support the show. Thank you. Good afternoon and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam. On this Monday, so Dune prophecy has begun. And I think that, I don't know if I've made my thoughts on this kind of clear going into the show, where it's like, I think, alright, let's start out with this. There's a lot of Dune expanding universe stuff, and I'm not a huge fan of a good amount of it. And I think that, it's one of those things where it's like, when you look at the original books, the first six, Dune, Messiah, Children of Dune, God Emperor of Dune, then was it Heretics and Chapter House? I think there's one I'm forgetting. No, that's it. There were 6 books. So after those 6 books, Frank Herbert dies, and Brian Herbert takes over. So what ends up happening is he ends up building out this expanded universe of all the ancillary information about Dune. What happened on Arrakis before, what happened on Arrakis after, and you end up with this kind of weird, Avengers Endgame style major crossover thing at the very end, and it's kind of weird, if I'm being honest. But regardless, point is, it happened. Now, one of the ancillary things he worked on early was he built out the origins of the schools. Where in the world of Dune, there were AI computers, thinking machines, which are referenced in the show, and we see in the beginning of the Butlerian Jihad. There were thinking machines that rose up, and then the humans had to destroy them. To replace them, there were 3 different schools that kind of honed mental acuity to do different things. There was the Mentats, which, dictated, higher level math, logic, and that kind of thing. There were the Guild Navigators, who did a fuck ton of drugs and ended up being able to see the future. And then there is the Bene Gesserit, the Sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit, who, honed their body to turn it into a weapon, using the voice, using using the ability to control, how they give birth, that kind of thing. And there are a few things in this show, and what it seems from what I've read of those, I haven't finished that trilogy, but what it seems like is that the Bene Gesserit, their plan with the Kwisatz Haderach, is to come up with the union of all 3. The person who is the Mentat, the Guild Navigator, and the Mentat, the Guild Navigator, and the Bene Gesserit all in one, and that's how you end up with Paul. And later, someone else as the Kwisatz Haderach, who I won't spoil for you if you haven't read the books yet. That's how I interpret it. I could be wrong. Also, I haven't finished that trilogy, because I kind of gave up halfway through, I think, the first one. And I think the big issue I have with this show, and I think that this is kind of an issue I have with a good amount of the Dune expanded universe, is that very clearly the show starts out and you have the girl from End of the Fucking World, at the very beginning, who is playing the young version of the Harkonnen woman, who is the Mother Superior of the Bene Gesserit. And then you have, down the line, you have, what's it called? We skip ahead 30 years, and then here she is trying to get Bene Gesserit on the throne. She wants Bene Gesserit to sit on the Iron Throne. And in that moment, you get 100 years after the machine, the Butlerian Jihad, which I don't think they even call it the Butlerian Jihad, which is an odd choice. Then it's 100 years after that, 30 years after we just saw, and then it's 10,127 years before the birth of Paul Atreides. And it's okay, cool. So we're 10,000 years beforehand. And now for a frame of reference, because I looked this up last night as I was watching this, when I saw that, I was like, that's weird. Let me put that in a frame of reference. So the biblical city of Jericho was founded in the Neolithic era, according to Wikipedia. Because I was looking around 8,000 years ago, between the years of 7,000 and 8,000. And to that end, it's not quite exactly 10,000 years ago. It's actually less than 10,000 years ago. But, think about how much things changed in the last, let's say, 50 years. And then let's think about how much things have changed since the literal Neo-Stone Age and be oh, shit, that's a long time. Now, keep that in mind. And keep in mind that these are meant to be humans who have gone on a diaspora from Earth and are now out. The Great Scattering is humanity going out to the stars, and that's what this is. And keep in mind Earth's colonial history and all of that, and what kind of happened in reality, and the fact that 10,000 years prior, they're in the fucking deserts of Arrakis trying to, harvest spice. And they still haven't quite figured out how to handle the Fremen in 10,000 years. First off, the fact that it took 10,000 years for Fade Routha to be you know what we should just do? Just fucking kill them all and be done with it. No, it wasn't even Fade. It was the Baron. He's we should just fucking kill them all and be done with it. It took 10,000 years for someone to come up with that idea, and it's one of those things where there's so many other things that again, I don't think we quite grasp, because 10,000 years is a long time. I don't think we quite grasp how long a time period that is. Again, think about the Battle of Jericho, which isn't even the time period. The biblical city of Jericho was founded in that time, in the Fertile Crescent. Humanity was just starting to form civilizations in the Fertile Crescent about 8,000 years ago. We're talking the precursors to the Sumerians in Mesopotamia. Between the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers, for those of you who remember your global history. That's how far back we're looking. Slightly further back than that. It's one of the things where it's really? So we, the fashion is all kind of exactly the same 10,000 years later? No one dresses any differently 10,000 years later? Oh, okay. All the architecture looks identical. No one has thought of a new style of architecture in 10,000 years. No one has come up with new technology because they're still using the same fucking shields, with the same effect as they did in the first movie. It's one of those things where it's and it's the spice harvesters look identical. You mean to tell me you have such a fucking problem with the sandworms eating your fucking spice harvesters that you need to come up with all these ridiculous things? It's in 10,000 years, no one came up with a better solution. In 10,000 years, no one came up with a better idea on how to get fucking spice off Arrakis. It's shit like that bothers me. And then not only that, but again, it's the characters are all, oh, and here's Baron Harkonnen, and here's someone from the Atreides line, and here's the Corino sitting on the Iron Throne. And number one, it's setting it 10,000 years in the past. Yes, for the sake of the timeline, that is where this show needs to take place. But the things that they're urgently worried about, and we very early on they talk about how something's going to happen in the future that's going to remove the influence of the Bene Gesserit. And I consulted with Peter about this last night. He hasn't watched it yet. I watched it last night. And I asked him, I was like, so my issue is, the Bene Gesserit really lose their influence around God Emperor, not around the time of Dune. I mean, they lose some influence, because the issue is, like, with Paul, by the time Messiah, and spoilers for Messiah, it's like, yeah, like, they have control, they have a Bene Gesserit in the room, because Irulan is a Bene Gesserit. She's trained as a Bene Gesserit woman. And then also, Jessica is still there. Paul doesn't listen to either of them, because Paul is the Kwisatz Haderach, so he doesn't have to. Like, he doesn't have to consult with them, because he can do everything they can do anyway. So the Bene Gesserit have lost control of the throne. And it's not until God Emperor, when Leto II has, ascended. And again, keep in mind, Dune is 10,000 years after this. The real big issue with the Bene Gesserit come in once God Emperor happens. And that's 4,000 years after Dune. Like, it's not until Paul's son comes around that you end up with this schism in the Bene Gesserit, who have lost complete control and are now like, well, what do we do? And then you get this moment where it's like there's a schism within it. You end up with the Honored Matres and this whole thing. And again, if my pronunciation does not line up with how you read it in the book, please apologize. I'm pronouncing based on the audiobook, which is why it's like they call them Sietch in the movies. I will and always will call them the Sietch, because that's how the guy who narrates it pronounces, like, everything. Either way, the point is, like, when you, like, they're getting, like, 14,000 years is an astronomically long time to be worried about, like, oh, okay, well, this is going to happen in the future. Like, it's not like it's happening next week, or even within the decade, or even within her lifetime or her grandkids' lifetime. We're talking about something happening so far in the future, we're in the abstract, that it's like, it's almost comical to be like, we have to worry about this right now. And, like, I get the plan, and I get why you're doing it, and all of that, but, like, it's just kind of silly. And then you end up with this other issue that I have with the show, where it's like, something happens toward the end of the episode, if I interpreted this correctly, and I could be wrong, but it's Dune, and it's a Bene Gesserit trainee, and it's an Atreides. So, look, you don't show two people fucking in a show with a breeding program unless it's going to fuck up the breeding program. It's like a Chekhov's gun, which, like, considering that this is a Karina, the heir to the Iron Throne, or not the Golden Throne. They call it the Iron Throne earlier. That's Game of Thrones. The heir to the Golden Lion Throne, which I don't even think that's it. Whatever. The heir to the throne of the Emperor, which, again, the Carinos have run this shit since after the Butlerian Jihad, which is another problem I have. Is I was like, what? You mean to tell me you have all of these great houses that are constantly conniving and stabbing each other in the back, and not once did the Carinos get knocked off their throne? They were always just there? Like, what the fuck? Either way, the point is, so all of that's happening. And then she goes off, and she goes to this club, like this weird, like a club that would not be out of place in Star Wars, would be the best way to describe it. And she goes to this club, and she meets a guy who I'm fairly certain is an Atreides, and she fucks this guy. Now, again, she's being bequeathed to this kid who at some point is going to get her pregnant, and the whole thing's very weird. But, like, the point of that is for her to secure the bloodline so that way the Bene Gesserit can have a direct heir to the throne. That's the plan there. So now we have this thing where an Atreides is fucking up the birth, the breeding program, which is, like, happens so often in this series. Like, the Atreides, like, because, like, that's the thing, is that it's like, when you get, like, I'm sorry, I just had a loss for words. It's like, okay, so the only reason we get, Dune is because Jessica goes against what Jessica goes against the direct orders of the Bene Gesserit to have a girl. Because the plan was they have a girl, that girl then gets pregnant with Fade Rautha. That child is then the Kwisatz Haderach, and that's one that can be controlled by the Bene Gesserit, and that's their plan. Jessica fucks this up by opting to have a boy because she loves Leto. And because Leto wanted to have an heir to the throne, Paul, she has a boy, and that's why Dune happens. Dune happens because of that. And then everything that comes after, including God Emperor, happens because she decides to, because Paul is not under the control of the Bene Gesserit, so he has a kid with Chani, or two kids with Chani. He has Ganima and Leto the second, with Chani, or Chani, and instead of having it with Irulan, which would have put the thing back on track. And it's or with Aaliyah. I think that was the other thing too, is that it's like, well, if we can get him to the Bene Gesserit are basically like, okay, well, if we can't get him to fuck his wife, and he's only fucking his concubine, maybe we can get him to fuck his sister instead, and that'll work too. Dune gets weird. It gets really weird at a certain point. So, point is, like, all of this is happening in this world, and you mean to tell me that, like, they don't adjust for this plan? Like, after what happens early on, they don't make adjustments to this plan in 10,000 years? Because we're talking, like, very shortly after, when the school was just getting established and, like, everything is just starting to, to be built. Like, you don't adjust for this. This wasn't something that you were like, oh, let's just, let's pause for a second, let's make an adjustment, and then let's move on. Like, it's one of those things that, like, why wouldn't you have done that sooner? And then it's like, why were you shocked when this then happens later down the line again? Like, and then also it's like, this fucking soldier who very clearly is very, he's very, Jason Momoa coded. I would be interested to see if they introduce the idea of the Gola with this guy. I'm not holding my breath and saying it's definitively happening, but, like, I feel like they Jason Momoa coded him for a reason. And maybe it is just he's a soldier on Arrakis. But, like, that fucking fire thing is weird. I don't even know what that's supposed to be. Like, I'm like, I saw that and I was at a loss, and I wanted to ask Peter what it was, and he hasn't watched it yet, and I don't want to spoil it for him. So, like, it's one of those things where it's like, really? Like, he can cook people from the inside out? Like, that feels like something that's way overpowered, and, like, 10,000 years from now would be kind of useful. But whatever. It is what it is. And, I don't think they're doing good enough. Like, I'm like, my expectations were low for the show, and everything that I've complained about were things that I kind of expected going into it, because these are all kind of endemic issues with this series as a whole. Like, especially once you get outside of Frank Herbert's original 6. Once you get into Brian Herbert's expanded stuff, that's where you get into these kind of macro issues. But the point is, it's like, you don't, I just don't know. I just don't know. It's kind of disappointing to an extent. Yeah, I'm gonna keep watching it every week, but I'm a little disappointed. But on that note, we will wrap up there for today. Our next episode will be probably tomorrow. I think tomorrow we're going to do Amelia Perez, which we were going to do the other day, but I didn't. And then we also have some other stuff coming up that I have to watch screeners for. I don't think I can talk about them yet, but we will talk about them as soon as we can. Until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.